Hello. You guys are all muted.
No longer.
There we go. Hello, everyone.
Hi.
Hi.
Everyone good?
Yeah, we could.
All good. Thank you very much.
Thank you for joining us today for this panel discussion. So thanks to everyone watching. I'm sure there'll be a few more people coming in, but we'll get started. So we have been doing a series of panel discussions, and we had our first one a few weeks ago, and some people watching may have watched that one. But we had this discussion on conservation lessons with all these cool people that have been working in conservation for a long time. And one of the things that they concluded from all their work in conservation was that we really need to get more people engaged in nature, more people out in nature, more people interacting with nature to improve conservation. So we thought it would be really cool to have a discussion kind of about this, about conservation education, and see what works, what kind of experience the people here have, and what lessons we all have that we can share with you, and help the audience to be able to inspire others and kind of use these successes in your own work. So we have some really cool panelists. We have Stephanie, Lauren, Simangele, and Ernst, and I'm going to ask them to introduce themselves in a second, but they have tons of experience in environmental education, ocean education, alternative livelihood projects, science communication, all sorts of things like that. And I will also be joining the panel as well. I'll be moderator and panelist, representing Manta Trust. Okay, for the audience, I'm just going to give you some technical information. So this webinar will last a maximum of 90 minutes. We're going to have a discussion, and then we're going to have some questions. So as audience members, your audio and video is automatically switched off, but we would love to hear from you. So please put any questions or comments in the Q&A box, which is on the bottom of the Zoom toolbar, at any point during the webinar. And if the question is relevant at that time, we'll ask it. Otherwise, we'll ask as many as we can at the end of the discussion. If the question's for somebody in particular, please just put their name in the question as well, so I can ask the right person. All right, I think that's it for me. So I think if you guys could just introduce yourselves, your backgrounds, and what kind of work you're doing now, and what kind of work you've done in the sort of education and outreach context. Maybe Stephanie, you can go first. You're first on my screen.
Yes. Hi, everyone. First, I would like to say thank you for inviting me to be part of this panel. I'm happy to share some experience with more people passionate about ocean. My name is Stephanie Rojas. I am a marine biologist working on mobile fisheries within Peru. I started working in marine conservation since 2012, during the last year of my career. At the beginning, I was interested in dolphins and sea turtles, but then I start knowing more about mantas and devil rays. So I get involved more in the research of these species. And then I start well, my work is focused more in fisheries of these species. So during all my career, I was working close also with local and coastal communities, especially with artisanal fishermen, in order to improve environmental awareness about mantas and devil rays conservation. And also, thanks to my job, I had the opportunity to visit another projects and learn about this conservation project. Yeah, and at the present, I'm working at the project. I am the project leader from the Mobilities project in Peru, and this project is focused on devil's rays research. Yeah, and yes, this is more about me.
Okay, awesome, thank you. Lauren, what about you?
Hi everyone, thanks again for having me here as well to join you all. I'm sitting in South Africa, and I'm a marine biologist based here in the KwaZulu-Natal province of South Africa, but I I have worn many different hats, I suppose, in the ocean research and education space. My background is in conservation biology. I did my master's in conservation biology back in 2010. But I suppose I've always had an interest, even though I've been a scientist, in how science is translated into real world applications. So even when I was studying at university, I studied environmental science. I was always interested in sort of on-campus greening programs, climate change mitigation. So after my master's, I went on to work for a couple of years on translating research that was directed at trying to figure out how we monitor fish in marine protected areas on the South African coastline and translate that information to conservation managers and to rangers to make that science applicable for them. And then I went on to do my PhD also in marine ecology in South Africa's largest bay, False Bay. But while I was completing my PhD, I've worked variously in ocean education. So I worked together with good friends of mine, Hanli Prinsloo and Peter Marshall, with the I Am Water Ocean Foundation, which aims at getting kids into the ocean to foster a love of and interest in ocean life. And at the same time, I worked for the Save Our Seas Foundation as a science communicator and writer. So it was always this sort of way of translating whatever I was finding and the information I was always gathering and translating it in real time to people, whether they be children or adults. And yeah, now I work as a marine biologist for Wild Oceans, a program of the Wild Trust here in South Africa. And my research is focused on trying to support and improve conservation management here at the Isimangaliso World Heritage Site, which is one of South Africa's largest marine protected areas. It's a hugely connected ocean space, connected to Mozambique to our north. And it's really important, as my colleague Simangele will be able to tell you, for people's livelihoods who are intricately connected to the coast here in KwaZulu-Natal.
Okay, thank you. So much interesting experience there. Okay, Ernst, you're next up on my screen, so do you want to give it a crack?
Yeah, thank you very much. my name is Ernst. I'm also South African, but residing in Costa Rica for the last 8 years. And you know, my background is education. I'm a PADI course director. I lived in the Middle East for close to 14 years, and I was teaching a group of kids a PADI open water course while we were sitting there at a school. And I asked them, where is your favorite place to hang out over the weekends? And they all responded to me, indoors. You know, and I asked, why indoors? They go, well, you know, the malls, you know, or you know, playing video games, you know, and things like that, you know. And it gave me an epiphany. I realized that the generation that is growing up now, okay, has a massive disconnect to nature and the ocean, you know. And I realized that's one of the things that we need to try and address to be able to create a paradigm shift in the way that people and communities connect to the ocean. So in 2002, I founded a place-based education program in Dubai in the Middle East called Tawassul, which means to connect in Arabic. And what we ended up doing is I created a curriculum that uses place-based education. Now, place-based education is the type of education where you take children out of the classroom and they learn hands-on, minds-on type learning, side by side, with real-time researchers and conservationists, you know. And it kind of takes that same model, you know, that has been proven to work so many times, you know, where we learn from our ancestors or mentors, you know, and these people then mentor them and share their passion about what that's all about. So fast forward a whole bunch of years forward, you know, I now find myself in Costa Rica, where I have now adopted the same principles, you know, that I started 18 years ago. And we're running the program now here for local schools in Latin America, as well as United States and Canada that come over here. Our main focus over here is slightly different over here. Costa Rica being such a small country, we have one of the largest drowning numbers per capita in the world. You know, for such a small country, it's the second highest cause of accidental death. So we believe we need to address that first, and we can connect young people to the ocean so much better if we teach them to swim. So we have a Learn to Swim program that feeds into a NIPA junior lifeguard program that has a very strong ocean stewardship program. And then that's how we get people engaged in the ocean. So I'll talk a little bit about that in my talk. Thank you.
Perfect, thank you. So much cool experience there as well. And what about Simangele? Hope I said your name right there.
Yes, you did. Good evening from South Africa, another South African on the panel. My background is I actually studied biology, and for my master's, I specialized in pollination biology. And while still at the university and affiliated to the pollination research lab, I used to do a lot of environmental education, but it was mainly based on plants, obviously, and then on pollinators. And I developed a keen interest on policy, especially on the Convention on Biological Diversity. So I got involved with the Global Youth Biodiversity Network, which basically aims to mobilize young people for policy discussions, collect their views on currently discussions and bring them to the global level. As you may be aware that currently those discussions include new conservation targets for marine, for land, and for a lot of things. And leading into that, in 2017, I then co-founded a registered non-profit organization called the South African Youth Biodiversity Network, where we do the same, mobilizing young people from all walks of life, but working in the environmental sector to bring them in the table so that they have a say in environmental discussions. And then recently, I joined Wild Oceans, where I'm working with Lauren in the Oceans Alive project. So Lauren, of course, works as a marine researcher, but my role as a project site coordinator is on community engagement. So it involves environmental education, which we do inside and around Ismangaliso Wetland Park. But it's not limited to environmental education. It's also skills development and other opportunities that communities living in and around the park can be exposed to in order to make better their livelihoods. And of course, the history of conservation and protected areas in South Africa is complicated with an ugly history of people being removed. So the role includes a lot of engaging different stakeholders so that we are on the same page and we understand why it's important to conserve resources and how do we move together. So I get to interact a lot with the traditional leadership in the area, with the political leadership and all the other stakeholders. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. I think there's going to be some really amazing things you can bring to the discussion from all your experience. Okay, so I'm Flossie. Some of you might know me from the webinars if you've watched one before. I've been working with the Manta Trust with the Maldivian Manta Ray project. So that's their founding project in the Maldives for about 3 years on and off. And I manage all the education initiatives. So basically run an education program with local schools where we go into the schools. We have a different school every 6 months or so, and we work with a group of students and we take them swimming. We go and teach them about marine ecology or coral reefs every week. And the highlight is definitely the field trips. And that's kind of opened my eyes to the fact that if you get these kids or communities into the water, then they're going to be much more enthusiastic about protecting it. A lot of the people in the Maldives don't really snorkel or swim as much as you would expect for an island nation with beautiful coastline and accessible reefs. So it's kind of my mission to get as many people into the water there as possible. Yeah, I guess that's it from me. Okay, we'll get started then. So we've got our first question here. Conservation is a huge field with many sort of sub-disciplines. We've got marine biology, the more science like policy research side, and then you have the education and outreach side and social science. So the first question is, why do we need awareness raising and how important is it for conservation? And would anybody like to have a crack at that one first?
Yeah. I'll start that. Yeah. Yeah, I want to start actually by reflecting on my own journey of environmental education and outreach when I was young. It's interesting that now I'm back to work at Isimangaliso Wetland Park, because I was actually born here in one of the communities around the park. And my love for nature and for this sector started exactly because at school I was part of the environmental club, and we used to do a lot of excursions inside the park. World Oceans Day, either going inside to learn about marine species, about turtles, when it's another special day for rhinos, being taken to learn about that. So having been exposed to environmental education at a very young age contributed a lot to me actually considering it not only as an important thing to do personally, but as a career as well, as something that to pursue so that I get to mobilize more young people to be involved. So with this experience of mine, I'm just reflecting on the sense that when we get to reach out to people at a very young age and they grow up valuing nature already, it has large impacts not only in their daily behavior, but I'm actually aspiring to have a career in mobilizing more people to see value in the sector and work in the sector. I will end it there for now. Yeah.
Anyone else want to add to that?
Yeah, I was just going to add, perhaps taking it even one step back as putting on the sort of scientist's hat here, the idea that what we have to gain from nature, but what our impact is on nature, those two things are constantly changing. We have an impact on the environment, and empowering people with the correct information around what that impact is and how that changes over time, I think forms for me the basis of why awareness raising around what our sort of responsibility towards a living, thriving, sustainable planet means going into the future, and then our responsibility, I suppose, for future generations. So the idea that we probably need to have awareness of the fact that there are challenges, there are major implications of that we have an impact on this planet and its sustainability, and connecting people to what those challenges are, and then being able to solve the big issues that we see currently in the oceans today. And there's always a need for awareness, because those challenges change over time and our responses to them need to adapt. So it's this constantly evolving process. It's not like the environmental movement started 30, 40 years ago and we solved it, and here we sit today with no problems. We still have major challenges, and so we constantly need to reassess how we address those, and people being aware of what they can do to be part of that solution is the most important part, I suppose, for me.
Yeah, I think raising awareness is crucial, in our conservation work, because we can make people think about the threats that many species and ecosystems are facing, and show them how they can be part of the solution and not continue to be part of the problem. And also, I think it's really, really important to show what we are doing in our field, so people can start understanding all the, not only the problems, but only the good things that people are doing around the world.
I absolutely agree with the panelists. I think raising awareness, you could even change that for connecting communities to the ocean. I think it's so important. So when you look at the factors that contribute towards the current state of our oceans, I'm sure all of you guys have heard some of these, these statistics. One of them is, every minute there's a garbage truck of plastic being dumped in the ocean. 90% of the sharks have been wiped out as a species on the planet. So one of the key things you know, that we need to try and do to change that is actually connecting our local communities and making sure that the ocean is inclusive to all communities, not just a select group of scientists, you know, that are out there. And I think that is the biggest challenge, you know, that we need to try and do, is how do we translate all the research and things that we do over so that the majority of people understand that, you know. So, and this is pretty much what we try and focus on, is creating that connection with. Sorry, man, I've got a little dog here jumping and eating everything over. So I just want to give you a very interesting little story that we do with the kids over here, you know. So what establishes that connection? This is what we do with the kids, the exercise that we do with the kids. And I normally ask people, who's got a best friend, the kids, you know, that we have over there. And they all kind of put up their hands and say, yeah, I got a best friend. And I said, well, in the 2 moments in time, if you could go back in time and you could think about the first day that you met your best friend and the current day in time, which of the 2 points in time did you care more about them? And the overwhelming answer that I get is all the people say that we care more about our best friends now, this current moment in time. And my next question normally is why? And the feedback that I get from the kids is that, well, we know them better. We've spent time with them. We know what makes them laugh, you know, what's their favorite color, you know, and we love them more than the first day we didn't know them. And that is essentially how we are wired as humans, okay, and how nature is. If we do not spend time in nature, if we spend the majority of our time on our computer screens, you know, indoors, you know, we are going to have a disconnect, okay, to nature. So therefore, the more time we spend in nature, the better we get to understand it, we love it, and therefore we protect it. Because my final question to these kids then is, if anybody had to bully your best friend, what would you do? And they go, you know, I will fight them, or I'll stand up for them, you know. And that's just really what it's all about. So our job as conservationists and activists and researchers is to try and translate and make that connection personal, and to raise that awareness, to let people understand that we are responsible for what's going on in the oceans today and what we can do to make a difference.
Okay, thank you, Ernst. Yeah, that's such a cool example, and I might pinch that for my education programs if that's all right. I want to pick up on something that Ernst said and something that Semangale said about when you were young and you were exposed on these trips to, oh, what's just happened? Ernst's gone. When you were exposed on these trips to the environment, and how Ernst was saying we need to involve everyone in conservation. In the Maldives, a lot of the young people that we work with haven't really heard of marine biology jobs, or they don't think they're for them, or they don't know what it entails, if they have the right skills, any of these things. So I think one of the main sort of goals of the work that we do is to show these young Maldivians that they do have the right skills, or they can build the skills very easily to enter this field. And there's a lot of jobs in this field in their country, and most of them are filled by foreigners, obviously myself included, but kind of empowering these young people to know that they can work in these fields, and that these fields are out there, because a lot of them don't even know that this is a job that they could enter. And encouraging minorities. So a lot of the girls in the Maldives and the women don't swim as much as the boys or the men. So sort of hosting special learn to swim sessions for the girls gets them empowered to know that they can also swim, they can build that confidence, and they can enter these fields. Because in the Maldives, you see a lot of dive fields just full of men, and there's barely any women. So I think coming back to what Ernst said, yeah, it's really important to make sure everybody's included, and you're empowering those that naturally might not be as included. Ernst, I know you do some stuff with adaptive diving, and that's kind of on the same topic. Do you want to tell us a bit more about that?
Absolutely, yeah. So as we, you know, obviously believe the ocean is for everybody, irregardless of your ability or your background or your culture, you know, just through my experience teaching diving, you know, we found that the ocean is an amazing force when it comes to actually healing people as well, you know. And essentially, when I lived and worked in the Middle East, you know, we had an organization there called the Palestinian Children Relief Fund, which was a US-based not-for-profit that assisted with Palestinian and Middle Eastern kids that got injured by the war conflict in their areas, to get operations. And the majority of these kids either had limbs that they lost or they were paralyzed, and they're waiting for operations, and they spend a lot of time in Dubai. So volunteer groups around the city would then engage these kids and do something with them. So one of the things that I offered was we could take them diving. And I had a boy called Khalil that came in. He was about a 16-year-old kid that lost his legs in a mortar attack. And I was told about this young man, and we offered to take him diving. He was a little bit skeptical because in Palestine, the people don't really go down to the beaches at all. They view it as a place where people go wash their donkeys, so it's not really an area where they go down. So the cultural connection wasn't there with the ocean. So when he came down and I took him in the pool, he was a double amputee and he lost both his legs. So when he was under the water, the realization of not having any gravity weighing him down, was amazing. And it was like his eyes lit up. Once he was done with it, I asked him if he wanted to go to the ocean, and he said, absolutely. And we took him into the ocean, and it was just mind-boggling seeing the empowerment, and his fascination with the different types of marine life and everything like that. Long story short, he ended up doing a certification, and he moved back to Palestine. But the paradigm shift that took place because of this experience, he previously had no idea what a connection to the ocean would be like. And he says, if I can learn how to dive as a person with no legs, I can support my family, and he went back to university and he got a degree and he became the breadwinner. The program itself, we've seen beyond other cultures. We work with veterans from the UK as well as the United States that had post-traumatic disorder. We had a organization called Depth Therapy that we worked with and volunteered with, and Johns Hopkins did an actual survey to the soldiers that came and did the program with us, and they found that there was almost an 80%, can I say, increased success rates, compared to other holistic activities to help people with post-traumatic stress disorder. So the ocean is fantastic way to engage people, nature, to bring healing in people's lives.
Yeah, the ocean definitely improves well-being and reduces stress. And yeah, that's a very cool example. Does anyone else have anything they want to add before we move on? All good.
Yeah. I will add a bit on activities that are aimed to actually encourage young people to go into a lot of experience. And perhaps Lauren can add here. World Oceans has a separate program called the Ocean Stewards Program, where it was born basically on that realization that sometimes you will have students who study biology, but it's less likely to consider them specializing in marine biology if you don't have experience of what it's like to be out there at sea and doing research and you've never seen it. And that's very common in a lot of universities in South Africa, for you to finish your degree having done the theory, of course, and the practicals in the lab, and maybe a few visits on the shore at sea, but having never had the experience of going to the sea and experiencing what research is like. And recruit students each year, and the students get to join in one of the research trips. And that's going to be another component that's part of the projects that Lauren and myself are working on. But of course, Lauren is the one who'll be going with the students to see while she does the research, and some of them who are more interested in the community engagement of things will still be joining the projects, but to come to learn from me this side on how it's like to do community engagement related to marine conservation. But yeah, Lauren, if you'd love to share anything more, you're more than welcome after me. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that actually connects really nicely to something. There's sort of two threads that have been going on here in my mind. And the first is that we've talked about the idea that environmental awareness is crucial to solving a lot of the challenges that we face at the moment. The idea that we have to empower people with the correct information and knowledge of how to be part of the solution. And so much of that is a head space, whereas I always kind of cycle back to what was it that got us into our various careers in the first place, and that's a heart space thing. Certainly when you're sort of in science, that speaking about a heart space is sort of a taboo topic. You know, you kind of always in that cerebral space around thinking about how to solve this. And a lot of my work previous to this has been with children, and really thinking about how to not burden children initially with having to tackle the challenges that they've been born into in a society and in a world that needs a lot of healing, not only in the environment but amongst ourselves first of all. And that has been a real process of trying to think how do you engage people, and this I think follows neatly on from what Ernst was speaking about, not only showing what people can do for nature to be part of the solution for nature, but what nature can do for you. And that's about access, really. You know, I was very privileged. I grew up inland in South Africa, but I always had some sort of facilitated access to nature. You know, I grew up in Johannesburg behind high walls. I had a garden. But if I wasn't given the opportunity to go to places and I didn't have some sort of adult facilitation and guidance around encouraging and fostering just that sense of wonder and curiosity, I don't know that I would have ended up where I am necessarily. And I loved this about working with the I Am Water Foundation specifically, and their Ocean Guardians workshops, which we helped set up a few years ago in Cape Town, which is a very urban center of South Africa. It's a hugely unequal society here, and there's so much of that sort of structural inequality still in place in terms of children who live very close to the sea. They live within a few kilometers of the ocean, but they might as well be in a completely disconnected urban environment. And they live in areas where there's huge trauma. There's a lot of violence and trauma, and the idea of thinking, I know what it is that the ocean gives me on a daily basis beyond the sort of academic. It gives me this much oxygen that I breathe, and it's the food that we eat and the jobs that we survive on. But in sort of the emotional state, what the ocean gives us. And so the idea of starting kids off at first with this access to just the wonder, the gentleness, the trust in being able to move into the ocean. The ocean is an incredible confidence builder. So many of the kids that the I Am Water Oceans Guardian program works with have never been into the ocean, and putting your face in the sea is a hugely daunting thing if you've never learned to swim. But the idea of, as Ernst was saying, like, if I can do this, who knows what I'm capable of doing. And so that sort of healing, trusting, confidence building part is something that the ocean can give people. And I just really love that idea of starting with a heart space connection and not burdening children initially, and then leading them on a journey of this is what is beautiful. This is what you get beyond just, you know, the tangible things that we know from the ocean. This is how you can eventually be part of a more conscious, more connected, hopefully international community that lives through ocean conservation.
Yeah, that's such a good point, and I love that word heart space, and I agree. Sometimes we're sort of forced to think of things in such a scientific, regimented way, and actually we should think about what it is that makes people happy, why people value the ocean, and a lot of it is to do with recreation, but also to do with time spent on the coast with your friends and family, and making a connection to that place, kind of like Ernst was saying and you were saying, Lauren, even if it's not about the beauty of the ocean, but it's about the happiness that you felt while you were there. So you have this sense of place while you're there. That's super important. Okay, so that kind of leads us quite neatly on to the next question, which is about the biggest challenges that you think exist in creating more environmentally friendly communities through education. So Lauren kind of mentioned one of the big challenges is access, but does anybody have any other ideas on other challenges? Maybe Stephanie, you want to start?
Yeah, well, in my experience, the biggest challenge is change the mentality of the old people. In this case, I work almost all my life with the fisheries, with the fishermen. So these people have grown with a specific mentality, and also, for example, just to give you a big panorama about what is happening here in Peru, we have manta rays protected. It's the only species that we have protected here in Peru, but devil rays are not protected here. And for example, I met a family who used to catch these manta rays for a long time, and so many generations, and now they are one of the group of people who used to call me, "Hey, Stephanie, mantas are here. Are you coming? And do you want to join us in the boat?" And because they know that that I am working with that species, but it was not easy to change that mentality in them, you know. So the idea here is to put in the shoes of the other people and understand why they did that activity, and try to explain more, for example, why these species are vulnerable. The best thing here was that this species was not, they didn't bring too much money to the fisheries, catching this species. So that was easy to change their minds. So you say to explain that, for example, you can earn more money if you bring some people in your boat, and you can make bring people in your boat and looking whereas the mantas, and you can, you know, you don't need to spend too much, to make too much effort to catch them. And also you are putting more doing something good for the environment, and also your job will be more responsible in, yes. And so I think it's hard to change that mentality in old people, but I think we can do it. Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. And it's interesting in different communities who you kind of want to prioritize with changing that mentality. Sometimes it's the young people because they're the future generation. Sometimes it's the old people because they have the impact on all of the young people. But overall, I think it's everyone, isn't it? But that's a really nice experience that they've now changed to tourism, it sounds like.
I would like to add also here that, for example, now the childs of that fishermen are really interested in marine biology and to know more about the species. So that is really important for me, because it makes me feel that all the job that we are doing here are good and are yes, I don't know how to explain this. Yeah. But yes.
And they're having long-term impacts as well. It's
yeah.
not like you're just impacting that one person who changed to tourism. You're impacting all of their friends and family and anyone that they speak to, and they tell how incredible this change has been, or what experience they've had.
Yeah.
Okay, anybody else? We in Costa Rica, with Stephanie, I can definitely say we have a similar aspect over here. For us, as I mentioned in my introduction a little bit earlier, is the high amounts of drownings that we have in Costa Rica. So when people think about Costa Rica, they automatically think about a country that's environmentally ethic. Our mandate of Costa Rica actually states that 25% of all terrestrial areas of the country needs to remain protected areas. But what a lot of people don't realize is that Costa Rica has 10 times more ocean territory than they have land territory. And very little is being done, for the conservation of the oceans over here. So there's only a handful of activists and people that actually work towards ocean conservation over there. And there is a big deficit when it comes from government support, in this aspect. So we don't have a lot of funding. and abilities and infrastructure to engage the local communities over here, you know. And you know, what also echoes and what Stephanie was saying is that you know, when you're trying to engage a stakeholder like a group of artisanal fishermen in a local community, and you're trying to teach them not to catch the small fish or the unsustainable species, when they respond to you, yes, but this is what feeds my family, it becomes tough, you know. And you got to think laterally, and you got to think of ways to be able to do that. So one of the things that we're trying to do over here to win the trust of the local communities over here is the swimming lessons that Lauren was explaining about, you know, and creating these ocean stewardship opportunities for local kids. So about 4 times a week, we have local kids before COVID, you know, that we would then bring over, teach them to swim. And that kind of led into an ocean explorer program where they get to go and inspect intertidal zones and mangroves. And slowly but surely, you introduce them to, you know, these different marine ecology. And we found that these kids, their parents are very often, you know, some of the fishermen, you know, that you find in the area. So people get to know the work that we do. So it's definitely something that needs to be viewed like a friendship, you know, when it comes to grassroots conservation, you know, and being able to get that in. But then in parallel, you got to try and engage the government. And sometimes, you know, the government is not as open-minded, you know, as you would find grassroots communities are. So that's one of our biggest challenges, is finding that platform to engage government, to explain to them how important these resources are.
I was going to just jump in here to say that I think also a lot of this is around, once you've identified what the issue is, in terms of whatever the threat is or the challenge that you're trying to solve, is working it back to who your audience is that you're targeting. And because things are necessarily so connected in the environment, it's very difficult sometimes to disentangle neatly who that is. So sometimes we're only working with one group of people because that's the only group you can work with at one point in time. And one of the most useful things I always reflected on with some friends when we were working in this education space is thinking about your audience. Think about meeting them where they are now, not where you want them to be. So we're often coming from a space where we've already thought through what the answer may be or what it might look like. Not coming into a space and listening to what the reality is, and therefore working from that space of where is this group of people, where is my target audience, where are they sitting, and how to move them from where they're sitting now to where I want them to be, depending on what the solution is. And that's something to really think about, because so many of the challenges to communication around conservation is because it's often communicated in scientific language. There's a lot of jargon there. Just the language used is very exclusive, and there's a lot of mistrust of science, and rightly so, because some communities have been adversely impacted by the way science has been conducted over time as well. So there's mistrust, there's just a general barrier with technical language and jargon and access to information. And then one of the other things is just being able to meet at a point where you can have mutual respect and listen, rather than going in with a preconceived idea of what the solution is, the fit first, before figuring out the sort of the lay of the land. And that often is a trick, because we don't have time. In many cases in conservation and education, we don't have time in terms of grant funding cycles. In terms of how funding for a lot of this work works, we don't have 10, 15, 20 years to embed ourselves in a community or in a place to observe over time, to just sit there and say, we're not going to do anything right now. Actually, tell us what your issues are. Let's figure this out over a long period of time, and then solve it in a sort of empowering way. And I think Simangele can speak to this, I think, a lot better, actually coming from an area where she's been part of a community, moved away and come back. That process of time is a major barrier to how we address some of these really urgent questions, but it takes people time to move to a point of being able to change.
Yeah. I mean, I'll try to respond to your question using some of the localized examples that may not be relatable in other areas, but just to bring it home to South Africa, that one of the challenges to doing awareness and outreach for South Africa, it's history. It's such a sensitive issue that with communities living inside or around the protected areas, there's a history of them being forcefully rooted places that they stay in. So it's intertwined with a fight for their land rights. And when conservation was introduced, it came more or less as a reason why they were excluded from the areas that they stayed in. And access was restricted for the resources that they used to have access to. They used to fish every day, and then suddenly they're not allowed to, but there's no alternative livelihood. So it's a sensitive matter that sometimes you go, especially to the older people, and they'll be very honest with you to say, I cannot trust you when you come with that message. We trusted people like you 40, 50 years ago. This is how it ended up. So in the context of South Africa, and I believe this will be related to a lot of other areas, not only to Ismangaliso Wetland Park, there's just a lot of healing that is required and a lot of progress in addressing the land rights and disputes and access to resources and something like that. And of course, you would find out that it's mostly the older people who've experienced that are more not receptive to the message of you coming and doing outreach, whereas the younger people who tended to be more receptive. But the other one that my colleagues have touched on is the one of poverty, obviously. The communities that I personally work on, there's just a lot of poverty of if you were to come and say, don't fish, and the question, and if a person says, but there's no alternative livelihoods. So perhaps part of doing awareness and outreach is actually, sometimes it's the work that is way beyond educators, because you must work with other sectors that are going to identify what are alternative livelihoods and how do you begin to then teach people to explore those options that they have, or to give them the skills that they need to look at other options, either than direct extraction of resources from the ocean or something like that. Or how do you then come and not just say, don't fish this, don't eat this, and actually give a reasoning behind it, which I believe somewhere this is where it gets lost. If you have a more focused law enforcement, certainly coupled with environmental education that is focused into that, becomes a problem, because people just know that I'm not supposed to touch that, I'll get arrested. But if you were able to couple it with as intense environmental education that actually says, if you were to fish at this rate, in 5 years' time, you probably won't have access to it. Whereas if you do it at this rate, this is how it looks like. You will still have access to it for longer. So if I were to summarize it, I'll say in the context of South Africa currently with the projects we're working in, those would be two major challenges. It's poverty, which of course you can't do education without exploring alternative livelihoods. And the second one is just the history and the healing that is required, and the disrepute of land rights that needs, which is something that is more at a government and policy level, basically. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. That's really interesting, Simangale. When you're working with the Global Youth Biodiversity Network, do you find that the history of conservation and colonialism affects how involved you can get youth in this network? Does it affect your work in a big way, in that way?
Yes, most definitely. So I'll make an example. One of the currently in the steering committee, which is just the team that leads the network at large, we have Sefa, who's from the Philippines, from one of the indigenous groups in the Philippines. So it's more or less an experience that you find from a lot of young people from the global south, that for them, when they grow up, the understanding was that conservation is you put a fence, you disallow us to it, And then you have some rich tourists who can come in, they can afford the permit, and the motivation is that they are contributing to the economy. So it's then very easy that in our communities you grow up with young people who resent conservation for that. So yeah, it is true that even at a global level, we do come across those discussions, and a lot of young people who feel like that. And we just try to design programs, us who are in the team, to say, how then do we go back to those young people and say, let's reimagine conservation. Apart from going back to them, how do we speak to the political leaders themselves? Because honestly, we still do have leaders, even at an international level, who still have that idea of conservation, that it must be excluding to the people. So it's not necessarily a process of educating the young people to stop being resentful and understand that nature is about everyone and not excluding. It's about speaking to the policymakers themselves, who keep on enforcing these restrictions and sometimes these ideas that nature must mean exclusion of people completely. From basically, if I could use that term, yeah.
Thank you. That's really informative. Okay, so I think we'll move on to the next.
I would like to rescue something that Lauren said about how to communicate in an easy way what we are doing. So at the beginning, this was really difficult for me. I remember when I started doing some talk for the fishermen, my friends say, Stephanie, but even me, I didn't understand what you say. You need to think that I'm not a biologist. I don't know some technique words. So you need to be more relaxed and try to find the perfect word that the fisherman can understand. So so this also was a big challenge for me. And I think I need to continue improving this, but how I try to fix this is expending more time with the fishermen on field, but not only for the work, only, for example, if I have free time, I used to go for the fishing terminal and just start talking with the fishermen when they are around with these fishermen that are not working in that moment, so they are just relaxing and see what is happening. So yeah, I think also this is really, really important to spend more time talking to them, not only for job, also just to know what they think, to know what the problems are, what problems are they facing in that moment. So yes, so this is a really, really big challenge here to how to communicate also our work.
And it seems it's so important to build those personal connections and relationships. And even though, as Lauren said, it takes time and you always need more time and more people, if you build a relationship with one person, then that has so many levels to it and so many intricacies, which really make it effective. Okay, so the next question is, what are the key tools to reconnect people with nature? What should we prioritize in these education and outreach programs or initiatives? And what works, basically? And we've touched on a few things already, such as getting people into the water who might not otherwise be able to access it, making sure we reach a diverse range of voices. But I just wondered if anyone had anything else that they wanted to add to that.
I would like to share what we're busy working at the moment, which is something that's scalable, right across cultures and areas, and it's a tool that we can make available to anybody, which is fantastic. And it's the citizen science. I wonder if I could just do I don't think I've got a screen sharing capability, but
I can give you the capability.
Yeah, I've just got a couple of images that I can show you that is on here. So if I click on here, this is something, that we're currently using, in our local schools over here. Can you guys all see my screen?
Yeah.
Okay. So it's something that we developed called the Connect Ocean Citizen Science Explorer. And, what we're trying to do over here is use citizen science as a way to engage people, so kind of, one of the comments from the panelists, the fact that scientific language doesn't always translate that well, to, the grassroots communities and people over here. Citizen science is a way of crowdsourcing science by using observation skills, and involving them to be part, to discover something new about their local ecosystems, to learn something and then be connected, and David Suzuki, is one of the main guys that says, how do we use technologies that separate us from nature to help us understand it, and this current day and time, virtually everybody has a smartphone, even, in impoverished communities, people have access to some sort of a phone. So, so what we've been able to do is to use the use of building applications to create something that can be used in local communities, specifically, in inspiring the next generation of scientists and activists, by building an app that they would then go into the local ecosystems, gather information using protocols that's been designed by scientists, and then entering that in there. So a big part of what we're doing is focusing on STEM education. The reason why we're doing this, okay, is that we want to create more marine protected areas. Now, obviously, in Costa Rica, one of our biggest challenges over here is that there are some marine protected areas, but they're only marine protected areas on paper. So a much larger success rate is to create a multi-use sustainable community management zone, which is basically where we engage all the stakeholders in that local community, and we get these guys, on the same page, and we get a plan together and how we want to work together. So, so first of all, before we can do that, we need to make sure, that we and our communities understand the marine ecosystems, through this, citizen science, that we kind of putting together. And what we then try to do is to create these hope spots. So this is a picture of our local island over here, Catalina Islands, that we're using as a proof of concept. We're trying to create a marine protected area around this area over here. So the way that we're doing this is that we're co-creating with people that are working in the industry, scientists, activists, and actually teachers, to build a curriculum of ecosystems that's all connected to the sea. So Lauren, in your introduction, you were mentioning that, sometimes it's very hard to connect, let's say, someone from Johannesburg, or someone that's, up, far away from the ocean to the, to the ocean. How do you link these people that are geographically separated? And one of the things that we're doing is a source to sea program, how rivers are connected to the ocean. So what we're doing over there is basically taking kids into areas where they get to do some basic experiments, collecting macroinvertebrates and things like that, that is linked to showing the health of the oceans. And then we gather that information and add it onto an app. But the cool thing over there is that they're participating in science, and they collecting little crabs and little shrimps, and it makes them feel like scientists, and that really inspires them. If you got a beach, in your local community, you can do intertidal exploration, and what do we do over here? You can see these are kids from our NIPA life-saving program and our Learn to Swim program, and we actually use things like buckets and ice trays and rulers, and we collect certain specimens, we put them into surveys, using quadrants, and then they get to learn about how these are connected. We have a mangrove program. This is a group of kids that actually was restoring a mangrove that, after a big earthquake that we had in Costa Rica, was drowning because the actual earth lifted 1.5 meters, and they started a nursery and started transplanting mangroves. We do baited remote underwater video stations, okay, as a way to survey reefs and look at marine life species, abundance and population counts. And very excitedly, more than 50% of Costa Rica is deep ocean. And we're now looking at ways where, we can do deep ocean exploration using special drop cams and, techniques to be able to do that. So we have a very strong connection with the Manta Trust. And one of the things that we're working on is IDing the manta. So we, like in Peru, we also have a lot of big mantas that migrate through this area, and we enter those. All of these things then get entered onto an ArcGIS database, which you can see over here. So this uses geolocation. So the information that we gather by engaging the local community through citizen science and education, then gets entered into these surveys, which then allows us to put all of this data on a HubSpot. And this in turn allows us to be able to use spatial analysis to see how these data sets compare with each other. So in other words, you know, if we see inside of the mangrove that there's a lot of fishing of juvenile species because there's nets and stuff like that, we are able to then almost triangulate that, you know, through our Reef Explorer by seeing a lack of certain types of species, you know, that we tend to indicate over there. One of the things that we also see is because of the fishing taking place in certain areas, the shark fishing, you know, we also spot those, you know, by areas where the fishing boats are in such high concentration that we don't really see much of some of the, you know, the sharks that we see in the areas. So this is some tools that we're using that can be used in any area. So if you have a group of divers, okay, or you have a school, or you got a group of activists in your local community, we're trying to create almost like a dummy's guide to creating a marine protected area, like a recipe. And you could literally just use this, you know, system that we're trying to create and these tools and get these people together and then start collecting this data, then putting it together. And then what we're trying to do is look at this data, connect with local scientists and also government stakeholders to then come up with strategies to better manage these zones, you know, and therefore create more protected areas.
Thank you. That was really interesting. How much you're doing with citizen science is, yeah, it must make the people involved in it feel very rewarded to see how much their information is contributing. Okay, does anyone else, Lauren or Simangele or Stephanie, did Stephanie already go? Anyone else has anything to say about how we reconnect people with nature?
I think Ernest gave us the best example of how to connect people with the ocean. For us, well, in my case, it's really difficult to have a lot of people or bringing too much people to the ocean in this case, because I'm not all the time on field. But for example, this kind of program, I'm really happy that you are using there. Congratulations for all that. I think it's a lot of work also how to create this and how to make this work. But also, I think the volunteer programs are really a really interesting way to connect people also with nature, and how to what we used to at the beginning when I started working in marine conservation. I started doing some environmental education programs also, but was trying to make some ludic activities and try to make these activities with the kids in the coastal communities. So you can realize that how these people, they live in front of the ocean, but they didn't know all the species that they have there. So I think the best way to make this connection is to bring these people to this place and try to make some games and touch and see the species, and yes, and try to spend more time on field. So yeah, that's the best way how to connect them.
Yeah. On my side, a lot has been covered already on you need to get people to experience nature and the ocean. And I think one that I'm going to add on the side is to deal with local existing myths. In how in some communities, a lot of people are scared of the ocean or the rivers because they believe, in Zulu they would say, seven. They really believe there's a big snake that has 7 heads. So there's a lot of myths or sometimes beliefs or misconceptions that actually hinder the relationship between people and nature, beliefs that paint nature as dangerous. And I'm making an example with an ocean because it's usually with an ocean, and it's usually with ocean species as well, like sharks. So the fellow panelists have added is actually to identify existing myths in an area that paint nature as this bizarre, dangerous, unfriendly place. Yeah, thank you.
I think yeah, I think everyone's added such value here, and I'm going to just bring it back to something very, very simple. For me, the most powerful thing has been to use what you have where you are. And I think sometimes, you know, the discussion gets caught in this idea that you have to have access to the oceans to start fostering this idea of thinking about how we can better protect our oceans. And actually that way of thinking applies whether you're watching birds in your backyard or you're scooping a spider out of your bath before you run it. You know, the approach that we take to all life on this planet is the way that we will approach looking at the oceans. And it's so the idea that we don't necessarily know all the different animals in the oceans and the way the oceans function shouldn't be a hindrance if you're sitting inland somewhere without any access to the sea. Many of the people that have the biggest impact on the oceans actually aren't even near the sea, and the idea that often we talk about people who are really intimately connected with the sea as being most reliant on it, so they are often more responsive to solutions around ocean conservation because they feel the effects of that environmental change most keenly. You know, not everyone is affected by environmental change equally, and that's just going to be how it is, especially as we look at the way our climate changes over time. Many of us who sit in a position of relative comfort, where our livelihoods and our daily kind of existence isn't absolutely connected to the sea in a very obvious way, because we sit in that position of comfort, the idea of discomforting yourself to make lifestyle changes is sometimes a bigger leap than saying to someone, you have to stop fishing right here because now we put a marine protected area in place. So I've just been thinking a lot about the fact that so many of us are now around the world sitting in some relative form of lockdown or self-isolation. There's so many people at home where you might not have access to the sea. Many people have access to, you know, internet and all these incredible documentaries that are out there, but just being able to scale it back to a return to some sort of natural history. Just to not limit the potential of learning the names of the local birds in your back garden while you're sitting in your house now over this period where we're globally sort of locked down as a community, especially if you're in an urban environment and you can't get to the ocean. Being able to encourage your children to look at something like insects and spiders and birds and trees and call them by their names. You know, that's not a tree, that's a spruce or a white ash or an alder. I always love that idea of not limiting our potential. As much as I'm a scientist and I say that, you know, science is a jargon intensive sector, and it's quite a thing to guide people to that point of being able to communicate in that space. I also think we don't have to limit ourselves. I think every child is capable of learning that there's not just sharks, but there's white-tip reef sharks and there's black-tip reef sharks. And that just opens up a whole language and a whole way of looking at this planet. And that can start when you're looking at a blue jay or a blackbird in your back garden, or the way you encourage children to read books and to not look at things within a very limited framework, I suppose. Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah, I agreed. I just made me remember when I was a kid, I used to collect insects and put them in a little box and try and feed them and all this. And it's important to, yeah, raise awareness of the amazingness of the nature just outside your back door, and not just, oh, you can only fall in love with nature if you swim with sharks or you do something incredible like that. Especially at this time, as you said. I just want to share one thing that we do in the Maldives that seems really effective, and I'm sure all of my colleagues do the same sort of things. But one thing we do in the marine education program is we have a class on coral reefs, and the class is always interactive, but then we ask the kids in the school to split into groups and create their own class on coral reefs for their younger the younger students within that school, and usually they're their cousins or siblings or friends. And these classes are always so inspiring. So we go and watch them give these classes to the younger kids, and they come up with the most amazing experiments and games that are super fun, and they enjoy it so much, and it makes the learning so much more interesting and enjoyable for everybody. And then it teaches us the ways that the kids want to learn in the future, because we can use those experiments and those techniques that they've used in the future. So yeah, basically getting people to teach each other, I think, is a really useful tool for environmental education. Okay, guys, I think we will move on to a few questions, as we've had a few, and we've got about 15 or 20 minutes left. So thanks for everyone who sent in some questions. Feel free to send in a few more. We have a really big question from Anna. Anna has said, first of all, thank you guys for the opportunity to listen to you. I have a big question. Connecting people and communities to the ocean/nature is obviously a huge and essential part of conservation. In addition to that, do you have any thoughts on how to change larger forces in our societies and the world today? Anna's thinking of big industries such as industrial fishing, oil companies, guilty of oil spills, etc. How do we change these big forces and not just the individuals or the communities? Does anyone have any ideas for that one?
I think, you know, accountability is very, very important, you know, so it's got two sides of it, you know, that we need to do. So first of all, the government needs to be engaged, and government needs to be able to understand, you know, the importance of their resources. Like here in Costa Rica, for instance, like what I told you guys, is that little less than 2% of our ocean sides is conservation areas. So there's also, you know, Costa Rica is also in a financial deficit at the moment, you know, where they're finding it very hard to kind of get out there. So there's whispers of mining, you know, ocean mining and things that need to take place, you know, and things like that. So first of all, you know, government sectors need to understand, you know, the value, you know, that is related to ocean ecosystems, you know, and sometimes you need to talk their language, you know, so, you know, we can talk about our passion for the ocean and things like that, but if we don't have that common denominator to be able to explain to them the economical value linked, okay, to these ecosystems, you know, it doesn't help, you know, to be able to engage them. So what we're hoping to do, obviously through our citizen science program that I illustrated to you, is that when we go out and we do our surveys, you know, part of what we do is we look at vessel surveys. What type of vessels are actually in these areas? You know, what activity do they have? You know, a good example is if we see a dive boat, we can comment and say how many divers are on that dive boat. If they're fishing, what type of fishing do they participate in? You know, what do they use? And then what we're able to do is kind of reverse engineer to put a value to how much this island, okay, contributes towards the local community. And then you are then able to have the baseline data to be able to support your efforts in trying to get it protected. So therefore we're able to say, if you conserve this area, okay, you support this many people in the local community that equates to this much in a dollar figure or a rand figure, wherever you are, you know, so therefore it becomes easier to motivate that. So on the other aspect as well, you know, from companies as well, you know, 80% of consumers have indicated they will change their brand if it's associated with a good cause. So therefore, best practices is important. So we need to, as activists and conservationists, try and engage, you know, these big companies to be able to be, you know, responsible in the actions through corporate social responsibility, you know, to be able to carry the torch, to go out there. And one of the ways, you know, I really like what you were saying is you use kids to teach younger kids. But what we had as a success in Dubai, which had the largest environmental footprint per capita in the world, we actually got kids to do a project about reef restoration, where they went and to construction companies and explained to them that most of the ecosystems in Dubai got destroyed because of coastal development and dredging. And they were looking at creating artificial reefs, which were running at about $500 per unit, you know, from a project management that they did. And they said, if this company contributes and sponsors these reef units, they are able then to restore those ecosystems. So we had middle school kids that were 12 and 13, 14 years old have a meeting with a group of executives, CEOs of companies, saying, you know, it's your responsibility to help us conserve the ocean because it's our future. And they could not say no to the kids, you know, so it has so much more impact to have a group of young people go out over there than me as an old crusty, you know, to try and convince people, to conserve, marine ecosystems. So engaging the youth, I believe is very important, to engage corporate companies to be accountable.
Yeah, and then that all really goes back to the individual and the community at the same time. So empowering those people to hold these companies accountable or to hold their government accountable can then have an impact on the big companies. So it's all just a big circle, really, and it's good to start in one place and move your way around. Simangale, did you have something to say?
Yeah, when I first acknowledged that it is a very big question, and I don't think I'll do justice to it. I think I'll start with my reflection of course, when we speak of environmental education, here you're working on an assumption, or not on an assumption, on the fact that you realize that people are acting in a certain way because they don't have enough knowledge. Whereas when you come to big corporations, it's a different ball game. They are really aware of the devastating effects of what they're doing. The drive is something different. It's money, and it's not just getting a fish to eat. It's profit, actually. So then it's a different ball game, because of course you can't solve it by just environmental education. These are people who read the science, who sometimes dispute the science, who sometimes work their way around environmental impact assessments in order to have permits to continue exploiting. So for me, I think responsibility lies mainly in the government departments, in them enforcing strict regulations against this sort of extraction, and not only having these fancy legislations that stop the exploitation, but actually have resources that back them up. So many countries have such amazing regulations, but there's no money or capacity that is backing it up. So I'll make an example. They may have good regulations on how big trawlers are not allowed to go fish in a certain area, but it's not backed up by enough boats to go and do inspection in that area. And I think you're realizing from my response that I'm putting it in a context of how do we stop those corporations from a government perspective, or from another person's perspective, holding them accountable. Because I think on their side, they are very aware that what they're doing is bad, but the drive is money. And I am relaxed in people who are driven by money to see them withdrawing their behavior. So I think what needs to be more strengthened are government institutions, regulations that we put up there, and of course resources backing up those regulations and restrictions that exist. Yeah, thanks.
Yeah, I was just going to sort of follow on from Simangele's point there, that the ability to translate that then into what do we do as individuals. It's important not to separate your environmental responsibilities from your responsibilities just as an engaged member of civic society, whether it's being engaged around your civic duty to vote, depending on where you live and what country you live in. If you have a vote, if you're a voting member of the adult population, that is a hugely powerful tool to vote for the institutions that structure the society within which you live. And until such point as we can change or shift the way our economic models work, and if you want to go sort of read up about moving towards a circular economy, or moving away from our sort of profit-driven ways of thinking, the ability to vote with how you spend as well, if you are a spending member of society, is again another powerful way to move beyond educating other people versus taking on the responsibility yourself. And that can be feel a hugely daunting thing, I think, because you kind of acting seemingly in isolation, but so many powerful things, looking at where you invest, you know, where you bank, all these very intricate things that are linked to the systems that structure the societies in which we live. So it's it can be, you know, being disruptive to try and disrupt those systems, like we saw, you know, the Extinction Rebellion in the UK last year and the year before, the sort of civic action being one way, but your daily choices about what you eat, where you shop, who you vote for, if you vote. And then also, I think one of the important things again is to realize that the challenges we face are not going to be solved only by scientists, conservationists, and activists. Again, I bring it back to this thing of looking at what your skill set is and where you are currently, and leveraging that way in whichever way you can. So whether you are a lawyer or an accountant or, you know, a gym instructor or something, just looking at what it is within your existing sector that could yield some sort of influence. How is it that you can engage in society to change things using your existing skill set? I think oftentimes we kind of get stuck on the thing of, I didn't study to be a marine biologist, but I also don't want to run around in the streets holding a placard. You know, what do I do? And perhaps that's the thing of, well, if I'm in a legal field, how do I leverage some of my skills towards an environmental focus, or shifting society towards something that is more equal, not only for society, but, you know, environmental justice is necessarily going to be societal justice. So yeah, that would be my way of thinking about it, I suppose.
Yeah, that's a great point about not just voting in a political way, but voting with your money and voting with your choices as well. And slightly in a different context, it just reminded me when I decided to give up eating meat, and that was inspired by a friend that I'd met, and she inspired me to give up eating meat. And everyone said, what's the point? It's just, you're just one person, like it won't really make any difference. But now half of my family don't eat meat, and some of my friends have really reduced the amount of meat they eat. So whether you agree with not eating meat for the environment or not, it kind of just shows that if you make these choices, whether they're political or personal choices like that, there can be all these knock-on effects that are really effective and inspiring and rewarding.
Absolutely. I was going to say just also the power of your vote as a consumer. I guess don't underestimate that. So I mean, one of the things that we know is has one of the sort of dirtiest footprints on our environment is fashion, you know, and that is driven. Yes, there's people who decide. I know nothing about fashion clearly, but you know, there's sort of trend setters and ways of working this a season or two ahead. But if you can influence whether you're going to buy, if people are going to stock that in stores, or you really hold retailers or producers accountable for their entire chain. And so that's something we always talk about in the ocean realm, being with, if you are going to eat seafood, make sure that you kind of influence that supply chain. It's really difficult because traceability in seafood is just an absolute minefield, and it's really impossible to have absolute traceability in most cases. But you know, the same power of consumption and your vote as a consumer is what drives, and just to be aware of what you're being marketed, I suppose, you know, that marketing plays to how we view the world, and to kind of reframe that and say, no, we can push back and choose not to buy into it.
Yeah, definitely. All right, we have just a few minutes left, so does anybody have anything that they really want to add just before I wrap up?
Yeah, I think I'll just do my closing remarks and say, for me, perhaps one of the things that I've came to learn in the field of doing environmental education is that, one, you must be willing to learn as well. When you go to teach people about something, recognize that they have something to teach you as well. This is mainly important if you will, who stay very close to that resource, because chances are there's a lot of information they know that they understand that you didn't necessarily learn in university or any other school when you're coming with your knowledge. So there's a lot of traditional knowledge out there that we haven't tapped into, and allowing yourself to learn as well as an environmental educator and making use of that information is important. And secondly, of course, to be sensitive and mindful of people's realities, that you may be coming to teach people about something, but the reality is very different for them. And I keep on referencing to this. For instance, if you're a community staying inside a protected area, outside, you can wake up tomorrow in your home. There's no law against that. You may wake up tomorrow if you have money and decide to make a lodge and have guests, then it's an economic activity. There's no restrictions against that. But with people, with communities that live inside or surrounding protected areas, the reality is different. You can't just wake up, have your garden. You can't just wake up, have any sort of development. So when you do an outreach awareness in any context, you really need to be mindful and sensitive to people's, yeah, thank you.
I'd like to add to that as well, from an education perspective, since it's a main theme over here, there's a great book, if you ever have the opportunity to read it. It's called The Last Child in the Woods by Richard Louv. And there's a quote in there that really resonates, it kind of, I could really relate to it, resonated with me. And he said in his book, he says, knowledge is important for the conservation of natural heritage, along the lines of that. He says it's important, but he says it's not going to be the long distance fuel that will help us save our planet. The long distance fuel that will help us save our planet is going to be passion. And passion doesn't get delivered through conventional education in the classroom. It doesn't get lifted from the internet or books or magazines or watching Netflix. It gets lifted from nature. And you need to spend time in nature to be able to connect to nature. So, it gets lifted from snorkeling with a whale shark, or getting your fingernails dirty by, doing water testing in a stream, inland, and you need to spend that time in nature. So if there's any parents or teachers or people that are out there, that are looking at how they can make an impact in their local community, it means you need to invoke that passion, and you start by finding what your own passion is. And, even what Lauren was saying about learning the trees in your backyard or the birds, that's very, very important, so start with that. Because if you look historically back to our planet, for me, one of my role models has been Nelson Mandela, so as a kid, having grown up, in the height of apartheid and seeing a man, that spent 27 years in jail come out and transform a nation, is quite amazing. And you look at anybody that's been a game changer on this planet, Martin Luther King, Jane Goodall, David Attenborough, any of these people that makes them, they're the same as us, but the thing that puts them apart is their passion. So if you really want to make a change in your local community or, on our planet, it has to be passion. You've got to find that flame that will ignite your passion. And that's kind of what I feel is important in creating a paradigm shift.
Just to add what Ernest said, I would like also to say that we have a really big responsibility to show what we are doing, and also inspire other people, because there are, for example, in my case, I used to use a lot my social media to show my job, and a lot of people are start to think about what is happening and what the problems are about the ecosystem or a specific species are facing. So I think we should continue doing that, show it in our job, and involve more people in what we are doing. So I think this is really, really important also.
Thanks. Yeah, it's been a lovely discussion and such a great panel. And I think for me, just in closing, to leverage off what Simangele says, the strongest motivator for me, whether I've been teaching university students or I've been teaching 5-year-olds, is to just at every turn remember that when you're teaching always stay open to learning. This is a very, it's a challenging sector that we work in. There's a lot of heaviness, there's a lot of responsibility, there's a lot that can get you down. And I think that it's quite easy to become fatigued by that and to feel de-energized, and really, what is it that keeps you going? And for me, it's always been being able to reconnect with the sense of wonder that, you know, a child brings when they first see something in a rock pool. And I really love a lot of the writings of Rachel Carson, who was a marine biologist and one of our first sort of environmental activists, an American marine biologist and writer. And she said something which I really loved, which is to keep thinking about what if I'd never seen this before, and what if I was never to see it again. But to really just keep yourself immersed in nature and inspired by the people you engage with, so that you're in it for the long haul, and stay open to the learning. Constant lifelong learning is what teaching really is all about. Yeah.
Thank you, everyone. Such amazing insights and yeah, good lessons to learn. And I've definitely learned from you all today. So thank you very much for taking your time to join our panel and giving us some of your wisdom. We do have a few more panels coming up for anybody watching that might be interested. We have one next Thursday at 3 p.m. BST that is on shark fins and gill plates. We're looking at the supply, demand, and the effects of COVID-19 with some really experienced panelists. So if you're interested, check back on our website and our social media pages for more information. That's mantatrust.org/webinars and just at Mantatrust on our social media pages. These guys all have worked for and do work for amazing organizations that you've heard quite a bit about today. So definitely give them a follow. I think Simongele and Lauren, it's Wild Oceans SA and I Am Water Foundation. Yeah. Ernst is Connect Ocean. Yeah. And then Stephanie, are you on Facebook and Peru Mobilid Project?
No, my job is in the Manta Trust webpage. Yeah.
But yeah, to keep up to date on the projects and keep getting involved. And I think what today has shown us is how we all need to sort of speak to each other more, collaborate more, and celebrate each other's passions and work more as well. So yeah, thank you very much for joining us, and thank you to everybody for watching, for sending in some really great questions. And yeah, have a great evening or a great morning or a great day, guys. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye. Thank you.